We're continuing our look at the upcoming free agency class with a spotlight on the interior defensive line. What does the top of the market look like? Who are some names that may make sense for the Dolphins, and how can they go about potentially replacing Calais Campbell?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, continuing to spotlight position groups of need for the Dolphins from a free agency perspective. And I think this is really helpful to kind of set the table for when we get to the beginning of March and you're looking at a hypothetical full simulated offseason of moves to understand where you have difficult decisions to make and strategic decisions to make, as far as you're not a team that operates with a blank check and an unlimited credit balance. And the Dolphins are a team that has a number of their bigger contracts set into place, and they may transition away from some of those bigger contracts, but the benefit of that is more for the long-term viability and flexibility of the team, not for immediate spending power. Now, with that said, if they want to sign any individual player, they could. I mean, it's mathematically possible to do so. Do I think that's smart and responsible, especially given the importance of kind of this transitional window that this team is in? No, I don't. And the good news is there's not a lot of temptation as it pertains to the defensive tackle class. Let's first do the thing we did with safeties yesterday, which was look at the market itself and ask yourself, where do you realistically expect Miami's dollars is going to check in? Because, what's the upper limits of their budget to spend on a interior defensive line? Because it was helpful to do that with safety and say, look, none of these guys are probably going to get a top 5 salary at the position, so they could be bidding for any of the names in the pool, in the talent pool. That's not the case at defensive tackle, where there are players making 31.5, Chris Jones, 27.5, Christian Wilkins, Nnamdi Madubuike, 24.5, Ali McNeil, 24.25, Derek Brown and Quentin Williams, 24, Jeffrey Simmons, 23.5, DeForest Buckner, 23, Daron Payne, Dexter Lawrence, 22.5, Leonard Williams, 21.5, Kenny Clark, 21.33, Javon Hargrave, who's actually technically on an expiring contract, he got 21 per. Christian Barmore's at 21. And that's it for the $20 million plus club at defensive tackle. But remember, you had one safety, Antoine Winfield Jr., who exceeded that number. And you have 2, 4, 6, 8, not a math guy, 10, 12, 14 defensive tackles. To put that number in perspective, that's the 15th place salary at defensive tackle is $18 million, which would be third for safeties. But that dollar amount to say, to have a budget to say we would offer a top 15 salary at the position to a player at that position, you'd have to have $18 million relative to, I just said on the show yesterday that, like, if you were going to tell me Miami was going to make an offer to bring Javon Holland back, it would probably be around $7 million per season, which is equivalent to like the 15th or 16th highest salary at the safety position. This is almost 3x that amount, right? So it changes the perspective of how competitive you can be in the defensive tackle market. Now, you can continue to go down, and as always, with many positions across the league, the middle class, the upper middle class is kind of lean, where you have just a handful of players between 15 and 20. It's John Allen, Vita Vea, Draymond Jones, Ed Oliver, Grady Jarrett, Zach Allen. That's it. So you had 14 over 20, and then you have that short list between 20 and 15. And then it's another pretty short list from between 15 and 10. And that's Cam Hayward, Dalvin Tomlinson, Grover Stewart, Sheldon Rankins, David Onyemata, Devon Hamilton, Malik Collins, DJ Reader, Zach Sealer's in this bucket, Justin Jones, BJ Hill, DJ Jones. So hopefully your takeaway from this conversation is not Zach Sealer needs a new contract, but that assuredly is something that is going to need to be addressed at some point in time, given Zach's outstanding production and play on the field. But I think now you're reaching the spending stratosphere of where, if we talked about a Jordan Brooks type contract from last year, that was about $10 million per. So you're talking about a salary that's outside the top 30 in the league at defensive tackle. So when you apply that through the lens of who is available, well, right now there's 3 players who are coming off of contracts in which they average $10 million or more. That's BJ Hill, DJ Jones, and Javon Hargrave. All those players are 30 or over. And all of them are veterans that, I think would be needle-moving talents for you. But at the cost of that kind of dollar amount, especially relative to if you can isolate the reps that you have to replace by not letting every expiring contract that you have walk. I think that's part of this too. That's important to note, where Benito Jones played 45% of the snaps. He played for less than $2 million last year. If you brought back Benito Jones to play for less than $2 million again, or to play for $2 million, to play 45% of the snaps, or ideally play less because you find through the draft or a free agent player who can play a diverse number of roles, can take some of that. But I think to just let everybody hit free agency, and the same goes for Deshaun Hand, you could probably bring those guys back for a combined $4.5 million. That to me feels like a no-brainer for guys that are playing 40% of your snaps. And then it's really just the conversation of, as we'll get to in the third segment, replacing Calais Campbell as best as you possibly can. Whether that's with a name off of this list, whether that's through the draft, whether that's by committee, even more so than what you had a committee last year on the defensive line, whatever that looks like. But that's where I think the strategy is going to come into play here. But I hope that puts saying Deshaun Hand and Benito Jones back for, if they sign for $2.5 million a piece, that's negligible dollars to be spent at this position. And remember, you only need the top 51 to count against the cap in the offseason. So you're talking about, if you sign them both for, just say, $2.5 million, the players that they'd be knocking off the top 51 are minimum salary players at about $1 million a piece. So you only lose $3 million in cap space to sign those 2 guys back. And you know what you're getting. They took positive strides. They're not game changers for you, but not every player on your roster is going to be a game changer. Right. But as we work our way through this list, just bear in mind, like the 15, the 18, the 20, the $24 million a year players is probably a section of the stadium that the Dolphins don't have tickets to, if that makes sense. So who is available? What names do we like for Miami? We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Speaking of tickets to the stadium, how's this for a segue? If you're looking for tickets for your next big event, whether that's last-minute tickets to the big game this weekend or a concert, comedy show, sports game, whatever, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I, of course, jinxed myself yesterday. I hopped on here on the show and had the audacity to just say how much better I felt because I was drinking some Gatorade. And, well, it turns out it was not a 48-hour bug. And that was not Gatorade. That was Pedialyte, to give you an idea of where we're at today, which is why show's dropping a little bit later in the day. But we are on the horse, and free agency's coming, right? Like, so we can't, no off days here. It's your team every day. We say it. And if I'm going to say it, then I got to live it, which means we got to shift our focus here to this defensive tackle class. And I want to take the same approach, acknowledging full well that some of the more attractive names in this market are not the $26, $27 million year players, or 26, 27-year-old players, if you will. There are some players that are of great interest to me in that age range, like Bobby Brown from the Rams. If you were going to let Benito Jones walk and you sign Bobby Brown free agency from the Rams, who played 42% of snaps for the Rams, as a 25-year-old who is just a barroom brawler inside, for an upgrade in cost, I would assume, for a player coming off a rookie contract, I'd be all about that life. Now, are we going to break the bank for $10 million a year for Bobby Brown? No. And that's part of the challenge, is coming up with valuations that are competitive offers that could get you in the door with signing a player. But Bobby Brown is 25 years old, A-gap defender of great interest to me, unrestricted free agent. Milton Williams with the Eagles. Bit of a unique build for Milton. I remember when he came out of La Tech, and I just loved his tape. And I think he would have the opportunity to be great in the Weaver system as far as playing the Deshaun Hand type of role. I think he gives you a lot more pass rush productivity and explosiveness off the line than what Deshaun Hand does. But he's 26. He played in Philly. Highly productive player. Now, or not, he's part of a rotation, right? They rotated at a very high level in Philadelphia. So, not a double-digit sack guy or anything like that, but with the opportunities that he has, playing less than 48% of the snaps, he is an active player up front that would have my interest. I think you can continue to work your way down kind of the youthful group. Maybe Tershawn Wharton from Kansas City, 27 years old, played over 60% of the snaps for Kansas City. I think he's somebody who, if you told me was a part of a rotation, a little bit more of a leaner player. I don't think he's a fix-all for you as far as your 80% snap taker type of role, like a Zach Sealer or Christian Wilkins. Like he's not that. But it is somebody who I would have great interest in coming out of the Spagnuolo scheme, and that their ability to develop talent is very well documented in Kansas City. Probably the marquee name that I'm interested in is Osa Odighizuwa from Dallas. Played almost 80% of the snaps last year. He is coming off of a rookie contract, and he had, I think it was 23 quarterback hits this year. He flipped the switch in a contract year. Now the sack production, the last 3 years, it's been 4.3 and 4.5. Actually had almost half as many tackles for loss this year as he did the year before, but he has 22 tackles for loss over the last 3 seasons to go with those 11.5 sacks. But 23 quarterback hits is almost double his previous career high. And he was on the field more. He played almost 20% higher snap rate than any of his other 3 seasons combined. I did his eval coming out of UCLA, and he's starting to trend and track towards living up to that billing. And potentially, he was a top 100 pick. He was drafted 75th overall by the Cowboys in 2021. That's a player for me that if you're going to spend at this position, a name like Osa Odighizuwa really pops off the screen to me. The challenge, of course, is where is the budget there? Is it in the Justin Jones, DJ Jones, David Onyemata, Sheldon Rankins? Like, is it under 12? Are you getting up into the Zach Allen 15 and a quarter, Grady Jarrett 16, Draymond Jones 17? Because if you get up that high, then you might be punching outside your weight class. But Osa, for me, is the top name on the market that I would get really excited about if you told me that they signed him at a price point that made sense. There'll be some names that you recognize that are available because they were drafted high, like a Jerry Tillery, like a Javon Kinlaw. Kinlaw played over 60% of the snaps for the Jets last year and got over $7 million on that contract to play there in New York. But probably a player I would pass on just because it's always been a potential versus production conversation for Javon, and it's never broke to production. It's always been potential. So, especially now that he has developed kind of a market price point for himself as a player. Now, if he fell out absolutely flat and you sign him for $3 million a year, I mean, I wouldn't lose any sleep over something like that. But I'd be very surprised if that's kind of the market rate. Be interested from a nose tackle perspective if they wanted to go a different direction from Benito Jones to tap into this Green Bay, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree parallels. And obviously Joe Barry has experience with this player. He was the defensive coordinator in Green Bay. Tadarius Slayton from Green Bay, 28 years old, played about 40% of the snaps for the Packers last year. Big boy, 340. Big break house in the middle. And if he was somebody that signed a deal comparable to the Raekwon Davis in Indianapolis contract last offseason, which was 2 years, $14 million and signed for $7 million, I think that's probably the upper echelon of what he would be looking for. But and I think it would be an interesting decision for Miami if they chose to pay the nose tackle type player that kind of money. But it's another name and dollar point to kind of inject into the conversation. All these players are under 30 years old. Slayton's 28. Tillery's 29. You get past this point, and now you're getting up into guys that are a little bit longer in the tooth. Maybe you can go bargain bin shopping here. Do you want to go bargain bin shopping here? I'm sure that, you're not going to get long-term answers everywhere. If you told me that you tapped in Poona Ford, who played for the Chargers last year, who have been asking for this team to sign for 2 years in free agency, and was really good for the Chargers last year, and he signed for the same amount that Benito Jones signed for in Miami. If you told me you went that route and Poona's, 30 years old versus Benito Jones being 28, great. Like that. That's totally fine. There are some other interesting players in this 30-year-old bucket. It includes John Kaminsky from the Lions as a Deshaun Hand type of power end defensive lineman who could play inside. Now, he didn't play any at all last year. He was hurt. So you got to be selective about how many times you dip your toe into that end of the pool of, well, this guy was hurt last year, so we can get him on a discount price. I know that's kind of the running bit with with the Dolphins and Chris Greer is the bargain bin shopping, and they've been guilty of it, and narratives don't exist for no reason, right? So I'd just be leery about doing that too much, especially if we're looking at safety and guard and defensive tackle, and that starts being the strategy of, hey, what if we sign all these guys and they do the thing they haven't done in 3 years and everybody stays healthy? We'd be a great team. You'd be like, yeah, you're right. Probably not going to happen, though. So Solomon Thomas as a rotational pass rusher inside. Sebastian Joseph Day from the Titans. Fali Fatukasi from the Texans. He was with the Jaguars before that. Both B.J. Hill and D.J. Jones are 30 years old. Those guys are coming off contracts that were $10 million per. Those guys would have a chance to be quality starters if you wanted to sign them. It's just, are they going to stay in that price point, and are you comfortable giving that kind of contract to a guy on the other side of 30? Dolphins are going to have no shortage of options and strategic decisions on how to go about trying to replace Calais Campbell. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game, where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. So pair that with one more correct pick, and you are cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tail into the Super Sweet Millie Winners Big Game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of a $1 million promo fund. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. It will not be easy, assuming the Dolphins have to replace Calais Campbell. I would not be mad for all of the talk about young and hungry and bringing guys in that have something to prove and have an edge and getting the average age of the roster younger and more competition and all that stuff. Calais Campbell kind of feels like an exception to the rule there, doesn't he? With how just how good he was this year for the Dolphins. I would imagine you would not stave off retirement for a 38, 39-year-old defensive lineman with a $2 million offer. Right. So I think that's important to note as well, is if you're going to do the thing here, I think you probably need to be prepared to make it worth Calais' time. And Calais, the previous year, played for $7 million in Atlanta. So, and that's assuming Calais comes back. And maybe he had a great experience with Anthony Weaver, and maybe he liked playing at home, and maybe he sees the opportunity for the team to bounce back, and maybe he does. And if he does, I'll be the first one to throw the parade here on the show about how fired up I am that Calais Campbell's back for another season with the Dolphins, because he was that good. He was outstanding. But if you don't bring him back, he played 58% of the snaps for you defensively. He played for $2 million. It's probably the best value contract on the team. If you're going to replace him anywhere near sufficiently, you're going to have to spend exponentially more money, or you're going to have to use one of your first 2, maybe 3, if you add a third that's before 98, picks in this draft class on a defensive tackle. And that's just the way it's going to have to be. Now, you could make the argument that with the presumed health of Chop, and Jalen, and Bradley on the edge, and the presence of Zach, that if you brought back Benito and Deshaun, and Zach's back and maybe on an amended contract, and you sign somebody in the top 40 salary range which puts you around that same $7 million. That's names like Daquan Jones with the Bills, Ashawn Robinson with the Panthers. Let's see. You're into a lot of rookie contracts at this point. Shelby Harris was 5. Colin Saunders was 4. I think you probably need a little bit more of a needle moving player than that. Somewhere between $5 and $8 million. And you brought somebody in. Do I think you would have a workable defensive line? Yes, you'd have a workable defensive line. But if you really wanted it to be a strength and an asset, you probably still need another piece, whether that's a vet via trade, whether that's a draft pick, whatever. I could tell you my favorite names on this list. I give you a nose tackle, and you could probably guess who they are when we went through the list. A penetration type and a nose tackle, Bobby Brown and Odighizuwa. Can you get any of them to sign in the Aaron Brewer to Jordan Brooks price point? I think Bobby Brown, you can aspire to sign for cheaper than that because of his role as a 325-pound just refrigerator in the middle who came on really strong this year, and he's coming out of who we were very complimentary of Spagnuolo and the Chiefs and their talent development. I think the Rams are doing a better job with talent development than anybody else in the league right now. That to me is the kind of player you might want to bet on, that if they let him hit the market, because they have a lot of guys that they've invested on the defensive side of the ball recently. I mean, you go through the Rams depth chart. And this is the advocation for why I think the Dolphins need to follow the blueprint of a team that used to be F them picks, or a team that started as reclamation of a quarterback, turned into F them picks, turned into now 20-plus rookies, consecutive seasons added to the team, right? They got Braden Fisk. They got Colby Turner. They got Byron Young. They got Tyler Davis, who they spent a draft pick on last year. They got Michael Hoyt. That's before you get to Jared Verse at the edge. Nick Hampton, they spent a 5th-round pick on. They might choose to not pay Bobby Brown, especially if it's going to be a $4, $5, $6 million a year, $7 million a year contract. Now, that's an ambitious contract to give out. You better be right if you do. But that, for me, having an asset at a different position allows you to mix and match your personnel in a way in which the ends can pick up the slack with some of the Calais Campbell reps. And then maybe you're talking about a mid-round pick and this free agent addition to platoon and take the rest of the reps that Calais took for you if you have to replace him. Won't be easy. And you probably won't do it to the fullest degree of possibility. You'd have to hit a grand slam. Or Calais can re-sign, which would be great. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. This was the most complex free agency outlook yet. I got another one coming your way tomorrow, so come back and see us then. Go Fins.